Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus, an Northside Numbers Game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, an exciting and expanding group of shows including the Bleacher Bunch, the Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, Baseball Rabbit Hole, and Bricks Behind the Ivy. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever it is you get your podcasts, and CubsPS Plus is always available ad-free to Patreon supporters at patreon.com/bleacherbunch, where you can support the show and always find a variety of benefits starting for as little as $1 a month. Come join just for the Discord channel. It's outstanding. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus, a spin on the baseball metric, OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it, please drop a review wherever it is you get your podcasts. And if you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you can share this episode with a friend. It's June 4th. The Cubs are 38-23 after a loss tonight to the Nats. And they're playing pretty good baseball. Today I've got Bryan Smith joining me to talk young pitching. We talk about Cade Horton, we talk about pitch counts, we talk about depth across Chicago and Iowa. And let's get into it. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. Before I bring in Bryan Smith for tonight's episode, I just want to thank you guys for being here. I know there's a relationship between a listener and a podcaster, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I've been going through some stuff this winter and this spring, and I'm doing okay. And I just want to be thankful. I just want to say that I'm thankful for you guys as an audience. I'm thankful for the interactions on the Discord channel. I'm thankful for all the interactions on social media. And I'm really thankful for this Cubs team. This has given me a great outlet, and I have missed creating the content that I typically create. I aim to be a weekly podcast, and I did not create an episode in the month of May. So hopefully this is a sign that I'm back to being able to do what I love to do. I love getting on this podcast. I love being able to talk Cubs baseball. And I'm really thankful for you. If you're still here, thank you so very much. I really appreciate you as part of my audience. And please interact anytime on social media. And I just love that you're here. So thank you. Welcome to episode 109. This week I'm joined by Bryan Smith, and we're here to talk some Cubs prospects and general state of the team and the system. And usually I start this off with a funny stat or a jersey number tied to the number of the episode. And this time I'm not. I'm going to talk about one thing Bryan and I are going to talk about are minor league pitch counts. And so Bryan, welcome to the show. And why doesn't anybody in the minors ever throw 109 pitches?
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Mike. Yeah, I mean, 109 pitches would be asking a lot, but you know what's funny is, and as we'll talk about, sometimes these guys throw 109 pitches in college, and then they get to the pro game and you know, they're treated completely differently. And so they're capable, a large number of them, but yeah, I think it's for the best that they probably don't go to 109.
Well, it's funny too, because I coach team baseball as well, 13 and 14-year-olds primarily.
Okay,
I'm
9 and 10-year-olds.
And so we follow the typical youth guidelines. I think Cal Ripken, Little League, all have the same rules with mandatory rest. I'm hugely in favor of it. I know a number of kids that are shut down with arm problems. So like the injury bug goes all the way down to the lower levels. But at the same time, it's not that uncommon to see a 13 or 14-year-old throw 75, 80, 85, 90 pitches.
Yeah.
I've had 2 kids on my team hit 90 this year. We work them up to it. Like I'm not an arm abuser. I pay attention to what they're telling me and what their parents are telling me and all that kind of thing. But I am a big believer in arm health, but also just like anything else, like you don't get stronger by not lifting weights.
Yeah, and arm health isn't just a number of a pitch count, right? There's a lot more to that than just measuring it by that singular number. And I think teams now, luckily, are able to measure that stuff way more scientifically. And I think it's just, you know, hopefully it helps combat what they're also doing behind the scenes with teaching different breaking ball techniques, teaching guys to throw as hard as they can. I mean, those two things need to work in concert. And I think for a large part of the 2010s, it kind of went the wrong direction where it was just, you know, everything that was being taught was just leading to more Tommy Johns. And hopefully we're getting to a point where they can kind of work in harmony more, where they can learn to become great pitchers with amazing secondaries, but simultaneously have a hope of health.
Yeah. Well, so I want to get into a tweet you sent out the other day. It's what kind of prompted me to ping you and get you on the show. But I think back to like the extreme example of this is Steven Strasburg. Was it like 2012, 2013, something like that? He came up and obviously was a star right out of the gates, and all of a sudden he's tearing it up in the National League. The Nationals are actually in contention, and then they're faced with, oh my God, what do we do? Do we shut him down and not have our ace for the playoff run, or do we run it and hope he doesn't get injured?
Right.
I think that's a real thing teams have to deal with, but let's take it back to yours. You had commented about Cade Horton and some of the Cubs pitchers not getting to push enough length in games in the minor leagues, and kind of what was behind that for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I noticed when Cade Horton was in the minor leagues, that the Cubs just had such a quick trigger pulling him. And what was really funny was that, we talked about pitch count not being an all-important number. Well, the Cubs stopped Cade Horton in the minor leagues at exactly 79 pitches, I believe 6 different times. It's either 5 or 6 times. So it certainly seems like there was a number in their minds and a start that was pretty darn important, and that was 80 pitches. But, this year when he was building up in AAA, he was having a lot of success. He got to 79 twice, and one of those outings, he was absolutely rolling into the end. And I was shocked at the time that they didn't let him take the 6th inning that would have taken him to a, career high with the Cubs. But they didn't. They stopped him at 79. About 10 days later, he's called up to the major leagues. And the thing is, Craig Counsell can't afford to have a starting pitcher with a 80 pitch count limit, right? That's just not, that's not his responsibility as manager when his responsibility is to get wins. And so, of course, they've asked Cade Horton to go more than 80 pitches plenty of times already. And, when we have an outing where he lets up a home, where he otherwise looks really good and lets up a home run when he gets, past 80, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe the fact that he wasn't prepared in the minor leagues to handle pitches 80 to 100, that he didn't sort of get those reps in, might have something to do with some early career struggles. I don't think this is something we're going to have a problem with for the rest of his career, but the purpose of development is to streamline the transition from the minor leagues to the major leagues. And when it comes to pitches 80 through 100, Cade isn't having that. He's more having to learn on the fly.
Yeah, and I'm looking at his pitch count right now. Interestingly, I can't get pitch count at Fangraphs unless I just missed it, but I'm a Baseball Reference. And it makes sense based on what he did in the minor leagues, they brought him up, and he got pulled earliest against the Mets. Part of it was how he pitched that day, and also the pitch count was not very efficient. But he's gone 77, 79, to your point, 92, and then 83, and then 77 this last one. And I think this last one, he just got pulled because of game situation.
Right. And
but to your point,
the 83 outing, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was the outing where the 83rd pitch was a home run. Otherwise it was going well, and then
that was the next to last start. That was the one against Colorado, yes.
Got it. Yeah.
The one this week was just yesterday against the Nationals, and he left with a couple guys on base and just a little bit of noise. And I think a lefty was coming up, and they went to Teal Bar. So I think he was probably close to getting pulled anyway. I think ideally they were hoping he would finish that inning, but
yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about Cade is that Cade was drafted by the Cubs in the first round, really, coming off the heels of one of the more dominant College World Series runs in recent memory. And in that College World Series run, he was past 100 pitches numerous times. Part of what made him so attractive is you're talking about a athletic former third baseman on the mound who just feels like he's never tiring. I mean, his athleticism is such a part of who he is. And, I think what the Cubs were doing in the early part of this decade was sort of sapping a little bit of that from guys and taking a little bit, I don't know, just like out of fear almost is what they were developing. Okay. And now I think through now Jason Kanzler, this is his second year in the organization as farm director, I think has probably more say than ever before this year. And we're starting to see that shift a little bit. Maybe Tyler Zombro has some influence on it as well. I think the Cubs are measuring things a little differently. And if we counted right now the number of Cubs minor league starters in 2025 that have thrown more pitches in a game than Cade Horton ever did in the minors, we would get to at least 14. And that's,
wow,
there's 20. We're talking about guys that are less far from Tommy John than Cade Horton was, guys that are pitching in the minor leagues for the first time this year. And the Cubs are willing more than ever to let guys start to get closer to 90. And I think that that's a good thing. I think you need to show these guys what they need to reserve in the tank for those last 10 pitches. You face a guy in the bottom of the 6th inning with 2 men on and 2 out, like that requires a certain amount of adrenaline and requires a certain effort level that you need to have saved in the tank. And I think you only get that through learning it. And I think the Cubs are now doing a better job teaching it than they did when Cade Horton was sort of coming through the ranks.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I see it in the 13 and 14-year-olds when they get out there and they get a little bit tired.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fine line between, sure, I don't want to hurt anybody's arm, and whether or not we win the game last night, like, doesn't really matter. But sometimes it's, what, can this kid battle out of this jam? I know he's a little bit gassed. Let's see if he has a little more in the tank, and if he doesn't, he doesn't. And nothing's cooler than having a kid go a little further than he thought he could. And that's going to build on itself. And then we see it through high school and college. And I do want to be careful to say, like, the days of, like, what Kerry Wood did in high school before the Cubs drafted him,
right,
like, would be criminal today and should be.
I mean,
I don't want these guys going 110 in Double-A.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's a fine line there between, pushing it too far where you're increasing injury risk, but also making sure that you're teaching new skills. And that's for more accomplished people than me. I have the luxury of just being able to second guess the decisions they do make. But yeah, I just think they're doing a much better job. I faced a little bit of backlash from that tweet. Not everybody liked what I had to say, but one of the things I would respond with is I feel really confident if you look at what the Cubs are doing this year in the minor leagues, that they didn't think that was that the way that they were handling it was right. Even if we look back at Cade in 2023, the season where he really had the most success and pitched more of a full season, I think they wish in hindsight that they would have let him go a little further, because they're letting guys go further that are less accomplished than him now. So yeah, it's an evolving thing. I think the sport's in a really interesting place of starting to mesh in some biometric stuff that's going to give them more information to go off of. And the fact that Cade was sort of left behind from that, I don't think is going to be that big of a deal. He's going to make his adjustments. He's got some good teachers out there and guys like Tyone and that'll help him sort of get over that learning curve. But there is a learning curve that I wonder if there didn't need to be.
Yeah. Well, and now that he's in the bigs, he's going to have to go through it, because to your point, Craig Counsell's not just going to pull his starter 4.5 innings because he hits a number. I mean, to a point they will, but they want to win games. And I'm looking at Ben Brown, and what's interesting is I do think Cade Horton brings a unique injury profile, because he only threw, 50 innings in college at all, and then had a really short season with the Cubs. Obviously was out most of last year with an injury. So I understand kind of the kid gloves aspect with him, but also it's a super talented arm, and you might as well not waste bullets.
Yeah, I mean, there's another component of it, which is like the season innings total, and that's one where, like, I could understand the carefulness that they had in 2023 when it came to the season innings total. I know they monitored that really closely. They were prepared to increase it in 2024. I think what I had heard was they were looking at increasing it by 25% last year. Then he suffered the injury. So there is going to be that sort of management, but in game, to me, just, I was always like, the idea of just stopping at 79 as a hard number just seemed so silly. I mean, sure, there was some coincidence to it as well, but yeah, I mean,
That is kind of wild.
Those two things sort of have to, they're separate to me. The innings total, you're managing long-term shoulder fatigue over months of time, where an individual game, I think what you're really monitoring is, like, when does body fatigue and adrenaline, like, when do they cease working together? And yeah, I mean, what I'm really curious about is how do they look at Cade's season innings total this year, and where do they stop it? Because everything that they've done in the past would tell us that they are going to have a hard stop for him at some point. This is someone they've managed very carefully, that they know last year's injury, was a real sort of development pauser. I think that they will stop him. But, at the same time, we're talking about a first place team that should have World Series ambitions right now. Like we don't have to
Yeah.
be afraid of saying that. Like this is a good enough baseball team through, a third of the season that they should approach this team as a World Series contender. And it's hard for me to imagine that we're going to get to October and Cade Horton's not going to be one of the best 13 arms available to the organization.
Sure.
And so, that's a tricky choice coming up. I'm fascinated to see, how they handle that.
What? And we've seen teams in the past, and the Red Sox have done it. So have other teams where you take a young starter, maybe in the second half, they go more bullpen just to get out there. You still get to use their stuff. You get to kind of leverage them when you want. But I think Ben Brown is another interesting guy because he lost most of last season with injury. Now he's got more minor league track record than, Cade Horton does because he came up through the Phillies system. But he's gone 100 pitches twice so far this year. He's a lot of starts in the mid 80s and high 70s. I think some of those have been dictated by his own performance, when he gives up a handful of runs. But I think Ben Brown is a good example like that. This next to last start, the one he had against Cincinnati where he gave up the 2 home runs right out of the gate and then settled down, retired like 12 in a row and then got in a jam. Sometimes it's not just about the pitches either because he was kind of cruising through those, that 12 up, 12 down.
Mm-hmm.
But when he was throwing the 2 home runs and then he got in the jam later, those laborious innings, or laborious innings, I'll use the actual English, are a little harder. I think they're harder on the whole body, not mentally in the arm. And I think if a guy's going to get hurt due to work in a single game, it's either just going to be a fluke thing where something was going to snap at some point, or it's going to be more working through when they're really fatigued, like in those moments.
Yeah, another rule the Cubs have had in the minor leagues for years now that I think is a good one is that they stop pitchers if they hit 35 pitches in an inning because they find that injuries are more sometimes common through being overworked in short bursts than over the course of a whole start. And so it's more important for them to, if an inning's getting out of hand. I mean, I remember starts where guys didn't get through 2 outs in the first inning and you're throwing your minor league team's staff off for a whole week when you do that. But the Cubs, I think rightfully didn't care in those situations. I remember a guy like Cole Franklin, having some of those sort of struggle-some outings where he hit the 35 pitches. And, I think it's the right decision in that instance to say, hey, enough is enough, especially for a young arm that isn't used to that level of a 1-inning pitch commitment.
Yeah. And I think to what we were saying earlier too, there's a line where you want to see them battle through. You start getting to 35 pitches in an inning, I don't think you're going to battle through that. I mean, you might have a guy top a ball or pop something up and get out of the inning, but I don't know that you're making yourself better at that point.
Right. I agree.
So, I mean, we look at the rotation now, and it certainly hurts that Steele's out for the year. Shota's been out for almost a month now, I think. Assad's been out all year. Hopefully he's coming back relatively soon. I know he's throwing. Have you heard any updates on Assad?
I think just that he's playing catch now.
Okay.
I don't know that we've gotten to bullpen yet, but I would think we got to be a month away at this point.
Yeah, and he's a guy that could help spell this. You could run some piggyback situations.
Totally.
You got that with Ben Brown too. As soon as Shota comes back, which I think sounds like he's getting probably pretty close to a minor league rehab. Once he comes back, obviously that's one starting rotation spot back, so you can, whether you're pairing up Ben Brown and Cade Horton maybe, or one of them goes to the bullpen. Maybe in Ben Brown's case, maybe he goes back down to the minors to work on some command stuff, but you'll have more options at that point. And so from what you've been following this season, I have not had as much of a chance to follow the minor league system. Who else is kind of that? I know they just signed Kenta Maeda to a minor league deal, so he's in Iowa, but as far as younger guys, who's kind of next on the list at Iowa if the Cubs would have more injuries and need to dip down a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, and I think I might have put this on Blue Sky, but I think the Cubs' current starting pitching depth, at this moment that we're speaking, is in its sort of most precarious position that it's been all season. They've had just, whether it's the Shota injury, the Assad injury, the Steele injury, but in addition, Jordan Wicks left to start a couple weeks ago with a hamstring injury. He's on the sideline. You have, a guy they signed like Peter Solomon, who's a vet that last, I think, pitched with the Diamondbacks, who was throwing pretty good. He went down with an injury, actually just returned yesterday. They've just, that Iowa staff is just as bruised and battered as the Chicago one is. So there's not necessarily a great answer. I mean, Chris Flexen is definitely the Cubs' sixth starter. If an injury happens, Flexen's going to go into the rotation. If two injuries happen, they're going to have to get pretty creative. One thing they did recently that caught my eye was Will Sanders, who's a former, I believe, fourth-round pick for them out of South Carolina, was having a nice breakout season in Double-A, and they moved him up to Triple-A. What felt to me like probably a couple weeks quicker than they normally would have, I think in part because they felt like his breakout suggested he could handle it, and simultaneously the organization had this growing need where like they need to start figuring out, do we have an internal option if we have enough injuries here? Is Will Sanders an option? So he just made his AAA debut last week. There's another guy in AA pitching well named Grant Kipp, former guy big guy out of Yale that's having a really nice breakout season. Wouldn't shock me if he went to AAA, so that they got to look at data from him there as well. So yeah, they're searching themselves. They're trying to figure it out. I think they're scouring the veteran market to see who would be willing to take a minor league starting job in Iowa, and selling the fact, hey, like we're decimated staff both in Chicago and Des Moines. If you join this team, that's I think what happened with Kenta Maeda is, if you join this organization, there's a pathway to you in the majors. Now, guys like Maeda, he's really struggling in AAA, so I don't know that he's necessarily capturing that opportunity, but it's there for guys, and they're desperate to find more and more arms for that Des Moines staff.
Well, and that's the nice thing about those minor league deals. I mean, I see grumbling every time the Cubs do one, but I mean, it's no risk. If Kenta Maeda goes to Iowa and he's terrible, they're just going to let him go.
Exactly.
But without trying those, you don't find Drew Pomeranz. You don't find, I guess they traded for Pomeranz technically, but him and Brad Keller and just some of these guys that they found. I still wish maybe they would have done a couple more things on the offseason just to deepen that bullpen. But I will say on the starting side, I came into this season kind of criticizing Jed for going Boyd and Ray as opposed to taking the money and maybe going a higher level arm like a Walker Buehler or somebody like that. But with the injuries they've had, I'm actually kind of glad they have the depth.
Yeah, I was critical of the Ray signing, and I'll eat my words on that one because even as Ray's starting to maybe regress a little bit in these last few outings, the value that he's already banked through 2 fantastic months to start the year is more than worth what they paid him. So that was a good one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the one thing I'll give Jed credit for is in season, they'd never stop looking for pitching. I mean, the Cubs last year found Tyson Miller and Jorge Lopez in June.
Yeah. And I mean, Jorge Lopez was just released yesterday, I believe, after he was DFA'd. No one claimed him, was released. I would not be shocked if he was released very deliberately because he had a job promised to him by another organization that might be one that he had success with last year. If Jorge Lopez is signed, whether it's a minor league contract to go to Des Moines to hang out until they have a need, or even a major league contract, they're always looking. And right now, especially like the next 7 weeks, they're not gonna let very many guys that even mildly intrigue them slip through their fingers.
Well, and Jorge Lopez would be an interesting one too, because obviously he had some extra things going on when the Mets cut him last year after throwing his glove and whatever. And they hung him out to dry in that one. But, he has the struggles, comes to Chicago. He was lights out for the Cubs last year.
Awesome. Yeah.
And then, has struggled this year. If he comes back with the Cubs and is good again, it really is going to make me look at that pitching development. Like, what are they seeing in these guys? And clearly with Lopez now, it'd be that there's a comfort level and he has trust with the organization. But I'm all for giving it a shot.
The nice thing is, I mentioned their starting pitching depth being really bad. Their bullpen depth is actually in a really good place. Mm-hmm. If I look at AAA, like Tyson Miller he's probably got about 2 weeks left on this rehab stint before he would have to be called up to the major leagues. But they've played that really deliberately to add sort of an extra depth arm. I'm sure you liked what you saw from Gavin Hollowell when he pitched for the big league team in May. He was really impressive. Ethan Roberts has had a ton of success in Iowa. Luke Little has pitched awesome the last month. It's starting to look like, I don't know, it almost looks like he's like throwing at 92% in order to command the ball better, and it's just he's having tons of success. And there's another lefty behind him, Riley Martin, who's a homegrown guy who hasn't let up a run in like 2 months. So their Iowa bullpen is really good. So the depth on that side of the team is fantastic. It's just the starting pitching side that they're going to be susceptible. Now, if Shota comes back in 2 weeks, and that they probably have enough depth then to cover for a little while, and then you get Assad back, and you're actually pretty flush again in starting pitching, especially if they make a deadline move like I expect. But the bullpen side is pretty good. And I mean, obviously the bullpen's been massively successful here for about 5 weeks.
And I've been impressed. I know they came out and Presley had his struggles and a lot of noise, and I obviously don't like a lot of those outings, but Porter Hodge stepped up and looked like outside of like one outing where he just didn't have it.
Yeah.
He looked like the Porter Hodge from last year. It's been really impressive to see, especially after blowing that first save, to see Daniel Palencia step up in ways like we always knew that stuff was there, but we just have not seen it in Chicago on any kind of consistent basis.
I think he really has battled confidence issues in the big leagues in the past, and he's like looked nervous to me on the mound in past years. And this season, I think in large part because Counsell entrusted him with this closer job in these couple weeks, and even when he blew a save in Miami, like 2 days later, he's in Cincinnati and called back on the mound to be the closer again. Like that stuff, subtle thing by Craig Counsell, but I think it really makes a difference sometimes with guys that are sort of on the fence. Do I belong or do I not? Now, like the last 3-4 Palencia outings, he looks so much like he believes that he belongs there, and that he's just willing to throw 101 miles per hour, like pretty down the middle, and just say, hey, if you beat me, you beat me, but I'm not going to walk you. The frustrating Palencia things are when he's in Miami and he walks the 9-hitter and we come back around and have to face Sanchez. Like, that's a young player who doesn't understand game situation and isn't confident enough to say, like, I'm better than this 9-hitter. Like, I'm throwing fastball down the middle. And I think the recent version of Danny is just the best version, which is like, come get it.
It's fun to watch. Well, and I love the fact that I've heard that Porter Hodge now I think is going to get back to throwing and make his progression back.
Yeah.
If Palencia stays healthy and Hodge comes back, if Luke Little has to come up and can keep the command he's showing in Iowa, you could start looking at a really nasty bullpen with really 3 to 5 guys who you could potentially throw out and grab a save if somebody's down.
Yeah. And I mean, the guys you mentioned there are homegrown guys, and we've been desperate for so long to feel a homegrown influence, and I think guys like me 3-4 years ago were like, it's coming. Like I feel good about it. I loved what Craig Breslow did with the organization when he was here, and I really believed that it was going to make a difference in the majors eventually. And I think last year we started to feel it, and this year the homegrown part is a big part of the team.
Yeah, and I love the Tyler Zombro hire. I think that's gonna take time to really see. I mean, he's had now a spring and part of an off season, but I'm really excited for how that's gonna look this time next year.
Yeah, and I mean, we can give him credit at least, I think, for Brad Keller, who, I don't know about you, but Brad, I feel the safest of any Cubs pitcher when Brad Keller's in the game, and then the Tyone changeup, which has been just a revolutionary thing for him, I feel like the last month.
It really has.
And that's another Zombro tread development that the Cubs are gonna lean on. And actually, to bring it back to Cade Horton, I feel like seeing Tyone have so much success with the changeup has only empowered Horton to throw his changeup more and more. I mean, he's throwing it more in the majors than he ever threw it in the minors. I mean, I would doubt that he had a minor league start where he threw 8 changeups. And I think we had one outing in the majors where he threw 16. And so I think that's from seeing JMO go out and, face the Marlins and throw more changeups than he ever had in the career in his career. And, I don't think it's a surprise that a couple days later, Horton does the same. And those things are connected to me, and it goes back to Zambro.
And I can only imagine the impact J-Mo must have in the locker room and the bullpen with those guys, because he's the one guy, if he goes out and, I don't know, gets bombed in 4 1/3 innings and the media comes out after the game and asks him what happened, he will sit there and talk about all the things he did poorly and why he did them poorly and what he's working on to fix it. Like, he will just talk about pitching at any level, any time. And I can only imagine the education these young pitchers are getting with him just hanging around.
Yeah, I mean, that first season when he was here and he was really struggling, I remember I talked to Justin Steele at some point in that season, and Steele was like, you don't understand how important this guy is to us. Like, he's like, that's my vet. That's like, he's helping me so much. And, that was a reason I think the Cubs were just willing to give him so much rope. And the fact that they did, I mean, they saw the benefits last year and this year, even though it's been more up and down, I think he's been really valuable during this last maybe 3 weeks where they've been a little short-handed, just eating innings, and he's had a couple good outings too in that stretch. It's really just the home run ball that's been an issue.
Yeah, and a lot of those I've noticed he's done a pretty good job of limiting them to solo home runs. I mean, the one game he gave up 3 home runs, but he only gave up 3 runs in the game, and it was a quality start and keep him in the ball game. One guy I wanted to ask you about, have you heard updates on Brandon Birdsell?
Yeah, Brandon's in Arizona. He's building up. I think he's throwing again. How far along on the path to pitching in a game, I haven't heard recently, but he should, and I should have mentioned him when we were talking about Iowa injuries as well, because I think there's a good chance that he'd be like maybe already have made his debut if he hadn't had the injury. At least be like the next man up at this point. And so it'd be great to get him back out there and be an option, especially if we get to a point where Horton gets shut down.
Yeah, he was amazing last year. And it'd be really nice. The other good thing about if Cubs can get that depth back, get Assad back, get Shota back, if Wicks can come back and contribute, you have some ability to kind of slow play, 6-man rotation, whatever you want to do towards the end of the season, because they really do have Matthew Boyd, Ben Brown, Cade Horton, Jordan Wicks, all missed huge time last year, and maybe won't be able to throw 130 innings.
I mean, internally there must be such a feeling of optimism about the fact that they've gone, 16-8 or so without Shota. The fact that they've been as patchwork as they have there, and they've just made it work. And I mean, that's what having an offense as good as the Cubs have provides you, is the ability to be like, yeah, we could probably get away with a 4.5 ERA starter for a month and make it work. And so that's sort of...
So breaking news, you're saying scoring runs is good.
Yeah, scoring runs, positive. It turns out it's a positive thing. Actually, the real revelation from the 2025 season is getting a hit with runners in scoring position is actually a pretty fun thing to watch. I had forgotten about it.
Yes. Well, it's great having you on the show today. Definitely have you back again. Where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on X at Cub Prospects, on Blue Sky at CubsSmith, and people can also hang out with us at the 1060 West Discord. We got about 500 people in there, including you, Mike, and probably a dozen or 2 dozen of your favorite sort of social media and internet writer personalities, and it's where I sort of game watch the most.
That's awesome. Yeah, I loved it. I don't post over there as often as I should, but definitely it's a great place to go consume. I highly recommend it. Thanks for coming on, and we'll get you back, and go Cubs. Hopefully they can keep winning series like they're doing.
Yeah, appreciate you. Go Cubs.
Thank you for joining us today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and a review wherever it is you get your podcasts, and share the episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS+. And check out the Patreon page, patreon.com/BleacherBunch, to help support all of our shows. Enjoy the Discord. It's a great place to talk Cubs baseball. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the CubsPS+ podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!